Welcome to the Leadership School podcast. I'm your host, leadership and self-care coach, Kyla Kofer. Here at the Leadership School, you'll hear leaders from around the world sharing their stories and expertise on how to lead with balance and integrity. Our goal? Teach you how to be an extraordinary leader. Dr. Cathy Owens-Oliver is the president and CEO of Educational Effectiveness Group. She's a speaker, author, instructional coach, education policy analyst, and national board certified teacher. For more than 25 years, she has provided coaching and consulting services for educational institutions, helping to improve teaching and student learning. In our episode today, she's going to show us that teachers are leaders and how improving teacher training can change a community. Join me to welcome Dr. Cathy Owens-Oliver. Dr. Cathy, thank you so much for joining me on Leadership School. I've been really looking forward to talking with you and hearing your expertise. So thanks for honoring us with your time.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So why don't we just get started by you going, and I would love to hear you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure. So I consider myself the edu problem solver. After almost 30 years in the education arena, serving at several different levels, from the classroom to the boardroom, I like to say, I do lots of coaching, school improvement coaching, school leadership coaching, teacher readiness and preparation work around the country. And I've authored several books, all things teaching and education related, because teaching is all I ever wanted to do. And so that's pretty much the focus of my work.
Wow. So how did you get to this point? You said teaching was all you ever wanted to do. You started out as a teacher?
Yes, absolutely. I started off as a high school English teacher. I loved it. And I thought that I would be 70 years old, still in a classroom, sitting in a rocking chair, quoting Shakespeare and reading Canterbury Tales to my students. So from childhood, yeah. So from childhood, I just never wanted to be anything else. I think part of it is spiritual calling, and part of it is being the youngest of 8 children, and my older siblings always had homework. And before I was even school age, they had homework, and I was jealous. That sounds crazy, but I wanted homework. And so
it doesn't sound crazy. Kid, you want to be involved with the people in your life.
Yeah. And I thought it was neat to have homework. So maybe I was just bored, but I think that made me fall in love with teaching. So my toys were always, the favorite toys were educational toys, miniature chalkboards and those little plastic magnetic alphabet that you could stick to the refrigerator and spell words. And so all my life, I just wanted to be a teacher.
Wow. And so you did that in the classroom setting, and then you moved on to training and educating teachers.
Absolutely. Yes. That has been the love of my life.
Wow. So tell me a little bit more about some of those details on what you're training and teaching teachers, because you're not teaching teachers how to teach English and math. You're going to a different level with that. So let's hear a little bit about that.
Sure. So I have a lot of focus right now on teacher performance, effectiveness in the classroom. A lot of teachers are doing the best they can with what they have, but they don't get enough training. And I should say I would include myself in that population at a time in my life, fresh out of college. There is not enough real world training for the teaching profession. You get about 6 to 10 weeks, depending on where you live and where you go to college, if you go to college, because now through the alt-cert process, some teachers don't. And so you just go in the classroom, and unlike any other profession, you have a toolkit of strategies and information, and you're expected to just make magic happen. And that's unrealistic.
Wow. Yeah. I haven't really thought about it that way, because I know you get a degree in teaching, but that classroom experience, and I know I've always known how difficult it is for first year teachers to really get in and do that work. But teaching has so many different elements to it, right? It's not just,
Yes.
Let me tell you about 2 + 2 = 4.
Right. Absolutely. And so that's why my work in training is so important, because teaching is the only profession where an employee is expected on day one to perform at the exact same level of someone who's been teaching 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They're just all sent into a classroom, given a group of kids, told to teach the curriculum. Here are supplies and materials, go for it. So the expectation is that on your very first day at 22 or however old you are, you should be performing at the exact same level as someone else in the building who's been doing it a really long time. So as you said, they need training around how to plan a lesson, how to set objectives, how to differentiate around students' individual needs, what to do when what you're doing isn't working, those kinds of things.
Wow. So we're talking about leadership here. So thinking about leadership skills, teachers are also expected to be leaders. They're leading not just a classroom, but teachers often have that role of people looking up to them. They're supposed to be leading the way because of their job position. But do we train teachers in specific leadership skills when they're in college?
No. And teacher leadership is a thing. So there's all kinds of material and research around teacher leadership, instructional leadership, professional leadership in the education setting. So the expectation is that teachers at whatever age, from whatever walk of life, will demonstrate certain skills that you would expect of a leader, organizational skills, leading a team, serving on a team, emotional intelligence for working with other adults and students' parents. And teachers didn't get that training. They got the content and curriculum training. They got the child development and psychology. So it is somewhat of a leadership vacuum.
Wow. Tell me about, in your experience as a teacher and on your training, how those skills have helped you, or how you've seen training the leadership, because you do leadership training. You're doing one this week. You're doing leadership training for teachers. So how have you seen that make an impact?
Sure. So I do the leadership training with teachers and principals or school leaders or district leaders. And I think the impact has been certainly appreciation for teachers as professional adults and not just glorified babysitters. When you look at the teaching profession historically, the idea is that they kept the kids while the others, or the smart people or the more driven people, went to work. The person who stayed with the kids and taught them some stuff, it just became it was a glorified babysitting job. And so over time, teaching has expanded to what they should know and be able to do, and what their students should know and be able to do. But the leadership training is critical because they work together at a grade level with other adults, making collaborative decisions about what's good for students, making collaborative decisions about how to change the culture and climate of the workplace. They have to decide whether or not they want to go back to school and what higher education would mean for them in the profession and in their classroom. And I refer to teachers as being professionals and having a practice, teacher practice. Doctors have a practice, attorneys have a practice, teachers have a practice, but they don't look at it that way. And so part of that thinking and self-development and efficacy is a part of the leadership skills that they need to affect change.
Yeah, I was going to ask you where you start. Do you start with that of saying, think of this as a practice and then let's build from there?
I do include that part of shifting their mindset to understand that this is professional practice. This is not, regardless of what you get paid, because we know that teachers' salaries are lower on the totem pole. It's a mindset shift. You are making an impact on children and their families, and that requires professional leadership skills. But I start with, what difference do you want to make? And a lot of teachers, even principals, don't know how to articulate that. Their response is always shaped around what they've been hired to do, but not the impact and outcomes that they want to see.
So do you do that on an individual basis, or are you doing that on an organizational basis? Because you're going in and you're training the entire schools, and you're kind of turning around schools.
Sure. Yes. So I work with groups of them. A lot of times it's a school leadership team, a district leadership team, a core of teachers from several schools who may be instructional coaches, or they want to be a team of principals or assistant principals. But in an individual school building, it is usually a team of leaders or potential leaders who are going to be a part of school improvement, school change, school turnaround. And I have to get them to think like leaders who have an impact on their peers, not just their students, in order to change the environment.
Well, because that's what they are. And that's, you're leading young minds, but you're also leading the community, because who's going to be in the community later? The people that you're teaching. Yes. So that is very purposeful, to really focus in and hone in on that mission. What is the legacy that we're creating here? And okay, so once we can articulate that, then what's next?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's how we move forward to what else is on the agenda for school improvement. Once they take ownership of problems and potential solutions, then I can get them thinking like leaders, and then we can shift school culture.
Wow. That's a big task.
Oh, yeah.
To change the whole culture of something, because like we were saying just a second ago, that's a community.
Yeah.
You're not just a school. So you're really working in the community too.
Yeah, in some regard, yes, because schools must have a connection with parents and families, like I said earlier, which comprise the community. There should be some connection with the local marketplace and how small and large businesses contribute to the success of a school in their community. So absolutely, it's broader than just working in the school building from day to day. And from a culture perspective, in schools, I like to look at it as a way of being. That's the best, culture is a very broad term. In a school, it's a way of being, and you should be able to think and feel and recognize the culture in a school the way that you would in a neighborhood, in a church, in your favorite restaurant. There's just a certain way of being, and I have to help teachers create that and not just accept what it is becoming in that environment.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, get into that. How do you create that? When you're teaching people how to do this, but how do we create it intentionally? What are the steps that we take?
Yeah. So when I work with the school, and if they have a leadership team, I look at who's on the team, something about their background. I actually observe them teach. I attend meetings, and I get a good indicator of whether people are really vested in moving the school forward, whether they even want to see any changes, or whether they're just comfortable with everything's fine to me type attitude. If that's the case, that sometimes can pull a team down. So I look at those things, and then I make recommendations to the school principal or leader in terms of, are the right people on this team? And then once we get that solidified, we start thinking about what works well and what doesn't in that building and what should be done about it. And my most favorite aha moment is when I give a litany of things I've seen, things I've heard, things I've experienced in the building, and teachers are shocked. I was in a school improvement team meeting with the school I work with yesterday, and I said to them, here's what's happening in this building. This is what I've just seen this week. And I said, one of your colleagues was sleeping, and I walked through the door and stood in the room a good 30 seconds or so before she woke up. Another one of your colleagues took 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes, to get students from one activity to move into groups for something else. And I gave other examples like that. One of your colleagues comes 20 minutes late every morning and is walking into their classroom when students are already in there. And that same person leaves 15 minutes early every day. And all the teachers in the group, they were aghast, because they're the highly effective practitioners who really want to see school change. And they think everybody's just like them. Not so.
Sure. And that goes back, I think, to that joy of being there, that purpose and that mission. Yeah. If those individuals are having trouble showing up, that's the leadership not showing them why they're there.
Sure. Absolutely. There's that word again, the leadership. So I tell people all the time, 90% of what happens in an educative organization is a leadership issue, positive or negative.
Interesting. So first of all, how does a school recognize this? What signs are there for the school to notice, we need to probably call in and get some help here? We're not where we want to be.
Sure. So some of it is driven by student performance and test scores, which I really don't think that should be at the forefront. I think that should be at the back. You put all the other pieces together and you're going to get high performance in terms of student learning. But some of it is driven by that. Some of it is driven by teachers not getting along. And sometimes that doesn't mean, in conflict or at odds with each other. It just means not strong community, don't really know each other, not having good relationships. Another indicator would be attrition and retention issues, where lots of turnover in short periods of time. Teachers on average only stay in that building 2 to 3 years. That's a problem. So parents don't come, they don't want to be there. They're not visiting, volunteering, coming in to talk, supporting. So those are all signs that there's a climate and culture problem.
Sure. Wow. It's like a small town. We keep talking and coming back to this community thing. And I typically think of school as like it just exists and it just operates and it works. But you forget that all these things actually do happen in the background, and it might not be working well. It might just be working. But if you want it to work well, which we all do. I don't know anybody who says, I want my students to fail.
Right, exactly.
No one wants to send their kids to a school that's not excited and engaged in teaching their students.
Sure, absolutely. But I have to tell you, lots of people do send their children to a school like that, but that child's class is not like that. So that's a part of my work, making sure that all the wonder in that class spreads around the school so that everyone is operating like that high-performing teacher or the high-performing group of teachers, so that all of the students are having that wonderful experience, so that all of the parents are aware of what their child is getting and not getting.
Yeah. So how are you doing that? How do you, when you see that wonder happening in a classroom, what's the practical skill of seeing that good things that are happening? So we talked about how to notice when things aren't right, but how do we say, okay, I see that this is going well. How do we replicate that and spread it?
So you have to build strong teams within the community. And that's a leadership issue as well. Leaders have to really drive that, expect it, push it, model it, celebrate it when it's happening so that others will see it and value it. So things like a strong team, maybe it's a grade level team, all the second grade teachers in a building. Maybe it's a content team, all of the English language arts teachers in a building, and how they work together. So that team approach and how they work together and sharing strategies, supporting one another, having each other's back, keeping each other accountable. When they operate that way, you identify those pockets of excellence in a school, you celebrate them, you work with the principal to make sure that bubbles up to the top so that others will say, hey, we should be working like this as well. And then that team will say, oh, well, this is how we do it.
Reward-based is so helpful to say, you were rewarded for doing things well, and we're going to reward that publicly too. And then that builds and generates that excitement.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. So teachers have kind of gone through a crisis in the last couple of years. I think there's been this like crisis thing happening around, in 2020 and 2021 and now 2022. It just has kind of ongoing. The people who are leading well during these crises, what skills are you noticing that they have? And the second half is, how can others develop those skills?
Sure. So I think one of them is problem solving, or I think I have to call it problem analysis, really. And there's a whole body of research around that. So at the onset of the pandemic, those who lead well, like you said, got together within their building to say, how are we going to keep learning going? How will we take care of our teachers? What will be our expectations of an online environment? What do we need to do to ensure that all of the students get the technology and the devices that they need? They didn't wait for local and state government to make decisions about that. They were focused on, how do we ensure that what we've been doing in a building is still being offered to the best of our abilities in a hybrid or an online environment. So that would be the direct answer to those who lead well. What do they do? And I think that other schools adopt that. So it's not just pockets of excellence within a school. It's in other schools calling up or going over to say, hey, how did you do this? What are you all going to do? And that is how it spreads. The value of my work is sometimes they can't answer that question. And so I give them ideas and feedback and strategies. But another part of it is recognizing what works best for these students at this time. That's the phrase I like to use.
Yeah. And I think you really nailed it there just a second ago when you said they didn't wait, because leaders take charge and go when it's time to go, and they know that right now I have
Yes.
to move, and the importance of me moving right now, it could make or break how this whole thing turns out.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. In school, good school leaders had a plan A and a plan B of their own before anyone told them that they needed a plan, because their leadership is not just exemplified when they're at work or in the building. It's just a part of who they
Oh,
are.
yeah.
So they were already, thinking ahead.
Wow. I often think of teaching as an individual activity. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm realizing it's not an individual activity. It's very much a team activity. How do we operate together as more of a team? Because you've written exclusively about this, I think, in your most recent book, talking about how we improve the individual, but also do that within a team. Maybe you can talk about that for a minute.
Yes, absolutely. So in my book, Why Schools Fumble, Applying the End Zone Mindset to Academic Success, I talk about how if everyone in the building operated like a football team and had one goal at game time, then we would see more success. The challenge is that they have all of these different goals. And so the team approach, when you operate as or join a team, you have to clarify what the goals and objectives are. You may have some of your own personally, but you have to clarify as a group, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's where we want to go. And that's how we move schools forward. The challenge for leaders in an educational environment are what I call in my book, the marginal players, those who are hanging on for the ride, those who need to be a part of the team, but they don't want to be a part of the team, or they're on the team, but they're not fully present. They're on the bench, or they're getting paid to be on the practice squad, but not really get out on the field at game time. And so we have a lot of that happening in schools as well. So that's the challenge with the team approach. When you say, we think of teaching as being individual, but it really is a team approach. Absolutely. And when someone on the team is marginal, then there becomes a breakdown in the outcomes. So imagine really quickly a third grade team, and there are 4 teachers: social studies, science, English language arts, and math. So let's say the social studies teacher decides, I'll close my room door and I'll do my thing and everybody leave me alone. But everyone else on the team wants to be a group and wants to talk about the students together and wants to share what they know about the parents. That one person who's not all in creates a breakdown in the whole system. So it's very much a team concept if we want it to be successful.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I'm thinking in terms of a sport. Like, you wouldn't say, well, half the team's goal here is to win the game. The other half team is just, to kick the ball once or twice. Those 2 people over there, their goal is just, be there and get their uniform on. And then you do have personal goals within there. My goal is to, score the most goals, or my goal is to throw the furthest amount of yards that any other player. So you do have some personal goals in there, but it's all with that same focus of, we want to win, we want to be the champions and do that. So where we can all do that on the same page as, here's our goal for our school, this is where we want to go, and then we each have our own achievements that we want to achieve. But it's not saying, I'm gonna, like your social studies teacher, I don't want to sit there in a room by myself and just kind of figure it out, because that's hurting not the only team, but it also hurts that person, because they're not getting that feedback from everybody else.
Yes, absolutely. And then it hurts the students.
Hey, I'm really grateful that you're listening to the Leadership School podcast. Since you've listened this far in, it tells me that you're really enjoying it. It would mean the world to me if you could think of one person right now who might really benefit from this content. Take a second and share the podcast with them. Let's spread the word and grow leaders with integrity and balance. Yeah, wow. Well, I've heard you talking about this for a while now, and your excitement about it. And you said you just loved being a teacher and you loved the homework and all of that. But what about it brings the most joy to you?
The teaching part or training leaders?
I would say the training leaders. That's what you're spending most of your time doing right now, right? But just what about that is so joy-giving to you?
I think for me is when I can see change in any leadership environment. sometimes it takes a long time to affect real, meaningful, visible change. So when I actually see visible change, when I've worked with the team in a building and I see their influence on other teams, when I hear the sixth grade teachers say, we need to work more closely with the fifth grade teachers because these, we need to know more about the students and what they know well and what they don't know so well so that next year we'll be prepared and we'll be able to meet their needs, that kind of thing. I think that's what is the most delight for me when they recognize on their own, we're all, not just the grade level team, but we're all, everyone in this building, responsible for student learning.
And I imagine that once everybody gets on that page, they're moving closer to their goals.
Absolutely.
How do you mark that in a team? How do you measure those metrics of where you were to where you're going? People bring you in because they're struggling in one way or another, the ways that you mentioned. But how do you mark that? Oh, we've met our goal here, or are they continuing goals? I mean, it's never like, oh, we've arrived, we're the perfect school. It's these continuing goals. But how do you know you're succeeding?
Yeah. So it is ongoing goal setting, but I think success is determined by impact and outcomes. So let's say, for example, teachers are showing up. We talked about that a few minutes ago. They're showing up and they're paying more attention. They care more about how they show up. So they are coming early or staying late if necessary. It's when they're volunteering to tutor their own students after school, as opposed to just writing a note to the parents, you need to get a tutor, or saying to the principal, I can't get the scores up. It's them recognizing, hey, this group of kids needs more help or more enrichment, and I'm willing to put that time in. So it's all of those nuanced ways of improving the culture and the student learning outcomes that ensures that change is really taking place. It's when teachers start staying and not leaving after just the second or third year or the second or third month, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So those are things that we can track pretty easily. If you wanted to give advice to a first year, second year teacher, or somebody who's considering entering the field of teaching, what would be your advice to that person?
Oh, wow. So this is not going to sound very research-based or professorial, but I've come to see it in all those different environments I've worked in, both K-12 and the college level. In education in particular, you got to love it. There are a lot of careers where it's okay for you to sometimes like it, sometimes not. It's okay for you to stay there and keep working and getting a good paycheck because you're going to get a good environment, but you really don't care about what you do. It's just something to do to get a paycheck. The education arena doesn't work that way. You gotta love it. You have to want to be there. You cannot be successful, and teachers will not be effective, and students will not learn in an environment where people are just biding time. It's not a clock in, clock out kind of thing. Whether you're at church or the emergency room, the gas station, the grocery store, that little kid is like, oh, it's Mrs. Oliver. So they just never, it's, I guess in some ways it's ministerial in a way, like it's just a part of your life, your whole belief system. So in education in particular, you have to love it. You'll never get paid your worth per se. You can be paid well, and educators should be paid well at all levels, not just teachers. But you'll never really earn your worth because you're saving lives. I say to people all the time, you're not teaching English and math. You're teaching Cathy and Kyla. That's very, very different. So I think that part is what's really important. That you have to love it. You have to want to be there. You have to want to see learning gains. You have to want to touch children's lives and turn their lives around. You have to want to put your heart in it.
Yeah. When you said that about the individual, it made me think too about how teachers have so many roles, not just teaching. We talked about teachers as a leadership role, but teachers now are dealing with kids who come in with trauma, who have tons of things going on. So teachers end up taking on some other roles. What are some of those other roles that teachers are expected to take on?
Sure. So something that you're probably hearing a lot in the education field right now is social emotional learning, which has always been around. Part of it is the root of it is character education, but it requires teachers to be a guidance counselor in some regards. It requires them to be in some ways a little bit of a school psychologist, mental health expert. It requires some of them to be a mom, to be a dad, Those are really legitimate roles. I know teachers who buy shoes, pay for lunch, bring a coat every winter, take a child home after school, rearrange their whole life after school so a certain child can play on a team. And so some of those are the different roles. Nowadays, it's being a nurse and everything associated with COVID. And most schools don't have a nurse. They don't have all of the additional non-instructional staff that they need. And so teachers have to take on those roles. And particularly where trauma is concerned, teachers have to know how to listen and what to listen for, and when some kind of referral needs to be made, and then what to say to a child in that instance, whether it's dealing with grief and loss of a loved one. Suicide has the suicide rate among children has increased drastically during the pandemic. What are the signs of that a child is struggling? In what ways can it be addressed? How can you provide support and encouragement until that child gets the help they need? So all of those are critical roles that teachers are having to play. It's why a lot of them are burned out, but it's also why a lot of them are highly effective. The other hats they wear.
Yeah, that is a lot of hats. I think that right there is why this leadership training is so crucial, because teachers are carrying so much weight. And when you can, any extra skills that you can add to your toolkit are going to make all the difference for you as you're pursuing this career.
Yes,
Wow.
Yes, absolutely.
This is the question I ask everybody, so I'm going to ask you as well. What does integrity mean to you as a leader in this field? Or just personally, what does integrity, what does that word mean to you?
Sure. Integrity. I think it has a lot about being who you say you are, not what you want people to believe, but being who you say you are, who you know you are, and being true to that. We just live in an environment now where people are trying to live up to what's expected of them, or they're not comfortable with being who they want to be or what's truly in their heart. So for me, integrity is me being true to who I really want to be and who I am, and not apologizing for that, and expecting that of others as well.
Oh, expecting that of others as well. Wow, that can be the hard one, I think, sometimes, because it's hard enough sometimes to really be bold and upfront yourself, but then to allow other people to do that means sometimes you have to be okay with their no, be okay with them showing up in a different way than you expect, and giving people the respect to do that. Yeah, it's really important. Okay, well, what about balance? So you just said how teachers wear so many hats. How do you live a balanced life in this role?
I think people have to decide what the quadrants are in their life. What is it? Social, emotional, familial, spiritual. What are your important constructs or sectionalities in your life? And how do you give them, I'm not going to say equal attention, but the necessary attention. So paying attention to all of those different facets of who you are, and making time for those pieces. We have to make time for rest. We have to eat. We need to eat well. The things that we have passion about. Sometimes we need to be quiet. I know for me, I have to get still and get quiet and kind of go to a place where I can reflect and focus on my own wholeness. So to me, balance is not about juggling different things and making sure you're giving equal time to every part of your life. I think it's more about paying attention to all of the parts of your life that are necessary for you to live well. And those things are different for different people.
Absolutely. Wow. That's really profound. How, on that, how do we encourage schools and teachers to create that type of well-being? Because this is a big topic. Teachers really struggle with this, with all of their responsibilities. How can we create that space in a school system?
Sure. So I think it's an individual thing. I don't think the system is going to create it. I think that school systems will continue to be far more traditional than they should. So I tell teachers and school leaders, you have to create a sacred time for yourself. I say this to every principal or school leader I coach. You have to have a sacred time. It may be from 8:30 to 9 a.m. It may be 11:15 to 11:45. It may be 7 to 8 p.m. every night, but you have to create a sacred, uninterrupted time. And that's not to catch up on emails and check your phone. It's to be still, to go within yourself and to think through what you need to get done and what you need to take care of for you personally and professionally. So that's one of the things that I tell them all the time for maintaining balance. And actually a more specific and concrete strategy, I tell specifically teachers 3 years and under, do not take work home over the weekends. It is the most difficult thing for them to do. You would be shocked. I just tell them on Friday when school is over, you take nothing home with you. You're not grading papers. You're not working on an activity. You're not doing lesson plans. You're not buying materials for your classroom. Just let the weekend be the weekend.
That is really good advice. What's your response when somebody says, but then how would I get everything done?
Oh, they always say that. What about all the papers I have to grade or the projects I have to do, or I have to log into the classroom dojo? And I say to them, I promise you it'll be here on Monday morning and it'll be exactly the same as the way you left it. I have to train teachers and leaders as well. You don't get finished. You just move forward. If they're trying to get finished and check everything off the list, that's unrealistic in the education space. So you don't get finished. You just make progress.
And the important things that need to be done will get done regardless. It's not like you're going to leave it undone. You're not going to leave those papers ungraded forever. They'll get done in their time. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, that's really wonderful advice. Is there anything else that you would like people to hear, especially as it regards to training and teaching leaders and building up those leadership skills?
Yeah, I live around 3 really important principles in terms of training leaders. And those are, who am I? Why am I here? And why does it matter? So I say that to school leaders. I try to demonstrate that in all of the work I do. When I work with college professors around curriculum and creating a syllabus and creating a new course, whatever it is along the whole educational spectrum, school superintendents, state boards of education, every person has to be grounded in, this is who I am, and this is why I'm here, and this is why I matter. This is the difference I make. This is the signature that I leave behind. This is my footprint in the organization. And I think when people use that kind of groundedness, it really makes them an effective leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Just having that sense of purpose and vision and value of who you are. It's like taking ownership of yourself and then sharing that.
Sure. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. This has been really, really nice and really enlightening. I'm not in the public education field other than being a podcast host. And so I really have learned a lot. And I'm just really grateful for you to spend your time and share this with us. You have a lot of great wisdom and expertise. For our teachers who are listening and our education specialists who are listening, how can we find you and get in touch with you?
Sure. So I am Dr. Cathy O on all social media, DrCathy and the letter O. My website is www.edueffectiveness.com, or just drcathyo.com will also take you to that place. And my books are all on Amazon.
Awesome. And your most recent book again was Why Do Schools Fumble?
Yes, Why Schools Fumble, applying the end zone mindset to school success.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here and for sharing all of your expertise. I'm just really grateful and honored to meet you and appreciative of your time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Thank you for joining me on this journey to grow in our leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, you've got to check out the leadership and self-care coaching programs on my website at kylakofer.com. Let's change the world together.